The Anderson family never thought much about the aging German shepherd that roamed their rural neighborhood. Most evenings, Rex would make his rounds through the nearby properties, accepting treats from friendly neighbors before returning to his own home. But on a frigid January night, something changed. At 2:36 a.m., the Andersons awoke to frantic barking and scratching at their front door. Rex had never come to their house at night before. When David Anderson finally opened the door, Rex's behavior was so unusual, so insistent, that he knew something wasn't right. What happened next not only saved 6 lives but sparked a nationwide safety campaign that experts say has prevented thousands of similar tragedies across America's heartland. Hello, my wonderful friends. Before we begin today's incredible story, I'd love to take a moment to connect with you. If you wouldn't mind dropping a comment letting me know where you're listening from, it would truly mean the world to me. Whether you're tuning in from a busy city apartment, a quiet suburban home, or somewhere in between, knowing we're sharing this moment across different places makes these stories so much more meaningful. I read every comment and feel so grateful for this community we've built together. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something wasn't quite right in your home? Maybe a strange smell, an odd sound, or just an inexplicable sense that something needed attention? We've all experienced those moments when something just doesn't feel right. Today's story might just make you pay more attention to those instincts. Now, let's journey together to rural Wisconsin, where an ordinary night was about to become anything but. David Anderson was a practical man. At 58, he'd spent 4 decades working with his hands, first as a carpenter, then as a maintenance supervisor at the local manufacturing plant. He believed in sensible precautions and routine safety checks. So when the carbon monoxide detector in their farmhouse began chirping intermittently a week earlier, he'd promptly replace the batteries. When it chirped again 3 days later, he replaced the entire unit, assuming it was defective. "New technology," he muttered to his wife Martha as he mounted the replacement detector in their upstairs hallway. Not like the old days when things were built to last. Their 1890s farmhouse had stood through countless Wisconsin winters, its sturdy timber frame and thick walls shielding generations of Andersons from howling blizzards and bone-chilling temperatures. David and Martha had raised their 3 children there, and now, with the house emptier but still too full of memories to leave, they had converted the downstairs study into a bedroom for themselves. Their son Michael, his wife Jessica, and their 5-year-old twins were visiting for the weekend, a monthly tradition during winter when the family would gather to share home-cooked meals and board games by the fireplace. That particular Friday had been especially cold, with temperatures plummeting to minus 15 degrees. The ancient furnace in the basement had been running continuously, struggling to keep the drafty old house warm against the Arctic blast. "Maybe we should get that furnace looked at," Jessica had suggested during dinner, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. "It's making strange noises." David had waved away her concern. "It always sounds like that when it's working hard. Been keeping us warm for 20 years. Jessica didn't press the issue. Like many young couples visiting their parents' homes, she and Michael had learned to accept certain quirks: the temperamental furnace, the occasionally brown water from old pipes, the creaking floorboards that made midnight trips to the bathroom an announcing event. After an evening of Scrabble and hot chocolate, everyone retired early. The twins were tucked into the room that had once belonged to their father, Mickey Mouse's nightlights glowing softly in the unfamiliar darkness. Michael and Jessica took the guest room across the hall, while Martha and David settled into their downstairs bedroom, formerly David's study. By midnight, the house was silent except for the furnace's persistent rumble and the occasional groan of timber contracting in the cold. At 2:36 a.m., the barking began. David woke first, blinking in confusion at the ceiling. The barking was frantic and urgent, punctuated by scratching at their front door. "What in the world?" Martha mumbled, pulling the quilt higher. "Probably that old shepherd from down the road," David said, sitting up and reaching for his glasses. "Rex, don't know what he's doing out in this cold." The barking continued, growing more insistent. David sighed, swinging his legs over the side of the bed and sliding his feet into his slippers. The floor felt unusually cold, even for January. "I'll send him home," he said, reaching for his robe. David shuffled through the dark living room, flipping on the porch light before opening the front door. A blast of Arctic air rushed in, along with Rex, a 9-year-old German shepherd with a graying muzzle and watchful eyes. Instead of greeting David or waiting for a treat as he usually did during his daytime visits, Rex immediately turned and began moving toward the stairs, whining and looking back at David with clear urgency. "Hey now," David said, closing the door against the bitter cold. "What's gotten into you?" Rex barked once, sharply, then moved to the bottom of the stairs, looking up toward where the family was sleeping. Something about the dog's behavior sent a prickle of unease down David's spine. Rex wasn't acting like an animal seeking shelter from the cold. He was acting like he had a purpose. David followed the dog to the stairs, a strange lightheadedness coming over him. He gripped the banister, suddenly aware of a mild headache pulsing behind his eyes. He'd assumed it was from being awakened so abruptly, but now he wasn't so sure. "Martha," he called, his voice sounding strangely distant to his ears. "Come here for a minute." Martha appeared in the doorway of their bedroom, tying her robe. "What's Rex doing here at this hour?" she asked, but her voice sounded slurred. Rex barked again, pawing at the first step, his eyes never leaving David's face. And that's when David made the connection. The headache, the dizziness, Martha's slurred speech, the new carbon monoxide detector that had remained silent upstairs. "Get Michael and Jessica and the kids," he said, his heart beginning to race. "We need to get out of the house, now." "What? Why?" Martha asked, but David was already moving toward the stairs, following Rex, who bounded up ahead of him. "Carbon monoxide," he called over his shoulder. "Call 911. I know many of you have had close calls in your own homes, those moments when something just didn't feel right. If you're finding this story relatable, or it's bringing up memories of your own experiences, hit that like button. It helps others find these potentially life-saving stories. Now, let's continue with this critical moment in the Anderson home. Upstairs, David found his son and daughter-in-law difficult to rouse. Jessica sat up groggily when David shook her shoulder, but Michael merely rolled over, mumbling incoherently. "We need to get out," David repeated, his thoughts becoming foggy. "Carbon monoxide. Everyone out. Now." Rex moved between the bedrooms, whining and nudging at the sleeping figures with his nose. When David entered the twins' room, he found both children unnaturally still, their small chests rising and falling in shallow breaths. Through the growing mental fog, David's instincts took over. He scooped up one child while calling for Jessica to take the other. "Outside," he kept repeating. "We need to get outside." Martha had managed to call 911, her voice slurring as she gave their address to the dispatcher. "Something's wrong," she told them. "My husband says it's carbon monoxide. The dog came to warn us." Moving the family outside into the brutal cold presented its dangers, but David knew it was their only option. One by one, they made their way downstairs and onto the front porch, Rex circling them anxiously, barking whenever someone moved too slowly. The blast of fresh air began to clear David's head as he settled his grandchildren on the porch swing, wrapping them in the quilt Martha had grabbed from their bed. Michael was the worst affected, barely conscious as David and Jessica supported him between them. By the time the first responders arrived 7 minutes later, the entire family was huddled on the front porch, shivering in the bitter cold, but alive. Rex sat at attention beside them, his duty far from done. The firefighters' equipment confirmed what Rex had somehow known. Carbon monoxide levels inside the house were at lethal concentrations, especially on the second floor where the children and young couple had been sleeping. "If you'd stayed in there another hour, we'd be having a very different conversation," the fire chief told David as paramedics administered oxygen to the family. "Maybe less." The source was quickly identified. The aging furnace had developed a crack in its heat exchanger, allowing carbon monoxide to leak into the home. The upstairs detector, though new, had been installed too far from the bedrooms to detect the rising gas before it reached dangerous levels. "But how did the dog know?" Jessica asked, her voice muffled by the oxygen mask. "How did he know to come to our house tonight?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable by medical science or emergency protocols. Rex, now sitting calmly beside Martha as she stroked his fur with shaking hands, did not explain. As the family was transported to the hospital for treatment, the mystery of Rex's timely intervention deepened. His owner, Ellen Schaefer, a widow who lived half a mile down the road, had no idea her dog had even left the house. "He sleeps in the mudroom," she explained when contacted by emergency services. "The door has a dog flap, so he can go into the fenced yard, but he's never wandered off at night before. Never." Further investigation revealed that Rex had not only left his yard, but had bypassed several homes to reach the Andersons, homes that were closer and where he was equally familiar with the residents. The attending physician at Wisconsin Regional Hospital, Dr. Teresa Linden, offered one possible explanation. Dogs have approximately 300 million olfactory receptors in their noses, compared to about 6 million in humans, she explained to the local reporter who covered the story. "Their sense of smell is roughly 40 times better than ours. It's entirely possible this dog detected the carbon monoxide, or more likely, sensed the family's physical distress from a considerable distance." Whatever the explanation, the Andersons did not doubt one thing. Rex had saved their lives. Once discharged from the hospital, their first stop was Ellen Schaefer's modest home, bringing the elderly dog a large steak and heartfelt gratitude. "I always liked that dog," David admitted, watching Rex devour his reward, "but I never expected to owe him my family's lives." The story might have ended there, a remarkable tale of canine intuition shared among friends and family, if not for Jessica's brother, who worked for the regional news station. Once he heard what happened, he convinced his sister to share their experience on camera. The segment, titled "Four-Legged Hero Saves Family of Six," aired initially as a human interest story during a slow news week. But something about the narrative, perhaps the combination of a loyal dog, a vulnerable family, and an invisible killer that could be lurking in any home, struck a chord with viewers. Within days, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. Rex became an unlikely celebrity, appearing on morning shows where experts discussed the science behind his life-saving actions. More importantly, carbon monoxide awareness organizations seized the opportunity to highlight the importance of proper detector placement and regular furnace maintenance. The timing coincided with several other carbon monoxide incidents across the Midwest during that particularly cold winter. State legislators, already considering expanded regulations for carbon monoxide detectors, cited Rex's story during deliberations. 6 months later, Wisconsin passed Rex's law, requiring carbon monoxide detectors on every level of residential buildings and within 15 feet of all sleeping areas. 4 neighboring states followed with similar legislation within the year. For the Andersons, the brush with tragedy changed more than just their approach to home safety. David replaced the ancient furnace immediately and installed carbon monoxide detectors in every room. But the experience also softened something in his practical, self-reliant nature. "I've always been the type to handle things myself," he reflected a year later, sitting on his front porch with Rex curled at his feet. "Never liked asking for help or admitting I couldn't fix something on my own." He reached down to scratch behind Rex's ears, the dog now a regular visitor who divided his time between the Schaefer and Anderson homes. "But that night taught me something important. Sometimes help comes from places you least expect it, and there's no shame in needing it." Ellen Schaefer, seeing how attached Rex had become to the Andersons, worked out an unusual arrangement. Rex would spend his days with her and his evenings with the Andersons, keeping watch over the family he had saved. "He comes home every morning for breakfast," Ellen explained to curious neighbors, "but he knows where he's needed at night." And on cold winter evenings, when the wind howls around the old farmhouse and the new furnace hums efficiently, the Andersons leave the porch light on for Rex, a silent guardian whose inexplicable instincts turned potential tragedy into a story of hope, and whose legacy now protects thousands of homes across the country. For them, and for countless families who have installed carbon monoxide detectors because of Rex's story, the lesson remains clear. Sometimes our greatest protectors come on 4 legs, asking nothing in return but kindness and perhaps, on special occasions, a well-deserved steak. As we come to the end of this incredible true story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing this time with me. Stories like Rex's remind us that sometimes the most ordinary companions can become extraordinary heroes when we need them most. This story feels particularly important to share because it could save lives. If you don't have carbon monoxide detectors properly installed in your home, please consider this a gentle reminder to get them today. That simple device, inspired by stories exactly like this one, could be the difference between life and tragedy for your family. If this story touched your heart, or perhaps reminded you to check your home safety measures, I'd be so grateful if you'd take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these important stories reach others who might need this reminder too. And I'd truly love to hear in the comments if you've ever experienced a moment when an animal seemed to know something you didn't, or if this story has inspired you to make changes in your own home. Remember, sometimes the most important warnings come from unexpected sources, and being open to those messages, whether from technology, intuition, or a loyal German Shepherd, might just save a life. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to sharing another story with you soon. Until then, stay safe, keep your carbon monoxide detectors updated, and maybe give an extra pat to the loyal animals in your life. They might be looking out for you in ways you never imagined.